In electronic music, sidechaining is a really important process, and there is different ways to use it and also different ways to achieve it. And therefore I wanted to share some ideas of how you could do that in your DAW. In my case, I will be using Cubase. The sidechaining function is mostly used to duck a bass line or a synth pad or even the vocals and the whole track, so that there would be more room for the kick drum. I think that would be the most commonly used sidechaining function, but you could also use it for other situations, for example to duck a reverb or a delay, and in that way produce more space, for example for your vocal track. To get your sidechaining function to work, you need three basic things. One is a track where you have actually sound on it. So what I mean is, for example, an instrument track that plays the chords via a virtual instrument, or that plays a bass line via a virtual instrument, or the other possibility would be an actual audio track. So the second thing you need on this track is for example a compressor or another effect that you wanna trigger. So in my case I will be showing it with a just standard sidechaining function. So I will be compressing the bass and I want to trigger the compressor via a sidechain function. So therefore I have a compressor inserted here on my bass track. And the third thing you need is a trigger for that effect. So that could be an audio track with the information that you need for triggering your effect. It could also be a Midi track, but that is a little bit more complicated, at least here in Cubase. So now what happens is I have my instrument that plays a, in my case, very simple bass line, and it sounds like this. And so far there's nothing interesting happening. I have here on my bass track the compressor inserted, and it is active, and I already have activated my sidechaining function that you can do with this symbol up here. That is the sidechaining symbol in Cubase, or if you have your normal channel strip view, you could do it with the SC for sidechaining button. And if I activate it, it lights up in white, and also up here, if I activate that button, it lights up in white. And these are the same buttons, so you see it is white now, and the other one too. And if I deactivate it, you can see it is deactivated here as well. Right now nothing is happening because I said you need three things, and I only have two right now. So the one is the track with my sound on it that you could just hear. The second one is the effect that I wanna trigger, and the third thing is a actual trigger. And since I only have the two things active right now, so my effect and the soundtrack, you cannot hear the sidechaining effect yet. So what we would do in the most commonly used function for sidechaining, so ducking the bass while the kick drum plays, is I create a kick drum, and that is just a basic 4 on the floor kick drum that sounds like this. So in case you're wondering why it is called audio click and it looks exactly like my audio click, just a short notice, that is actually an audio click. I made the kick drum out of an audio click, so if I deactivate my plugin that I used on the kick drum track, then you can hear it is actually a click. And I inserted an audio plugin and triggered it with another track, and then it becomes a kick drum sound. So now for my third function that I need to trigger the effect on my bass line, I go to my audio kick drum track, and there I have two different options. I could either route the output of my kick drum to the bass compressor, but that would mute my kick drum and I want to hear my kick drum. So this time I use another function, and it is, I think, even a little bit easier and gives you more options. And that is, I go here to my send effects, I click in my send effects, and I can also see all the side chains that are activated. And I see here my bass compressor, and I just click that, and then I can see here that some signal is being routed to this compressor. So now if I, like before, solo my bass track, but I also solo my kick track, then you can hear this pumping effect. And to make it more clear, you can also see it if I open my bass track and I show the compressor. You can see here the sidechaining signal, and that is when my compressor starts working. So in my 4 on the floor beat, you can see how it's been activated. And if I stop my sidechaining function, then you can see that it's not pumping in this 4 on the floor rhythm anymore. So that means if my kick drum plays, my bass gets ducked, so it gets compressed and it's less loud and the kick drum is better audible. That is what I want for my sidechaining, and that would be the most, I guess, the most commonly used sidechaining function, and that is a really simple way to achieve it. Like I said, you need 3 things, and one is the sound. The second thing is on that track an effect that you want to trigger with your sidechaining function, and you need a trigger. So right now I used my kick drum to trigger that effect on the bass line, but you could also do something else. What I do sometimes is I create a ghost track for triggering, because right now my kick drum is used to trigger a function, but I do not always want the 4 on the floor trigger. Sometimes I want another trigger, and that you can achieve if you use an instrument for triggering the effect. So what you can do is you go here to project and to your signature, to your time signature track, and you say render the click in between my 2 locators as a Midi or audio click. Then you get these 2 tracks here. One is an audio click, and it's actually only the standard click sound in Cubase, and the other one is a Midi track, and I routed it right now to a instrument so that you can hear it's just the standard 4/4 click. But it is on a MIDI track and therefore can be manipulated in various ways. So you could change the rhythm and the tone length, and that would have a great influence on your sidechaining function. But like I said before, to trigger the effect on my bass track, I cannot use a simple MIDI track. So if I want to use that advantage of changing my MIDI notes, I have to then route it to an instrument and then route this instrument to my bass track. That is the problem with MIDI tracks if you want to use the standard sidechaining function. So why did I do that to use the audio click or the MIDI click and then route it to an instrument track if I could just use my bass drum? So like I said, with the MIDI click, I could change it in the rhythm, so I don't have to go like 4 on the floor. I could change the rhythm, and that would also be the rhythm for the sidechaining function. So the compressor would be triggered by this rhythm I just created. That is one advantage of this function. And like I also said, you could shorten or lengthen the trigger notes. And that is also why I sometimes use my click track for sidechaining function, because as you can probably hear, my kick drum is a really long sound. So compared to my click, it is really long, and sometimes that is good for the sidechaining function, but sometimes it is also better if I have just a short transient and then a long time of nothing. So you can hear there's a great difference in the sound of these two, and that also makes a great difference in the sidechaining of my compressor on the bass track. So to just really short show you what I mean, I routed both of my trigger tracks to a pad, and on this pad track I have inserted a compressor, and if you click, here is my sidechaining symbol again, and if you click on that little cogwheel, then my sidechaining window pops up. And here you can see I have my kick drum routed to the sidechain and also the click track. And if I deactivate both of them, it sounds like this. You can hear the kick and also the pad. If I activate my audio click, you can see these really short triggering moments because my click is an actually very short sounding, transient, heavy sound, and right now it wasn't the perfect solution in my opinion, because you could almost not hear the sidechaining effect of the compressor. If I deactivate it again and activate my kick drum, then watch what happens to my sidechaining compressor. Look at the waveform that it is showing. And here you can see it looks very different than before my click. It was compressed way harder. Okay, I have to admit it is a much stronger and probably louder trigger than my audio click, but you could also see that the length of the triggering was very different, and therefore the effect was drastically another one than by my audio click. But it could also be that the kick trigger is way too long and not the right trigger, and therefore the audio click would be an interesting solution. So that is the just standard sidechaining function and how you could use it, for example, to duck a bass line or a pad, a synth pad in electronic dance music. But there's some more things you could do with sidechaining or other solutions you could use to get the same effect, and that I want to show real quick right now. So two very simple solutions you could use to get to the same effect if you don't want to use the sidechaining and this somewhat more complicated process, or if your DAW does not have the functions of sidechaining, or you don't want to buy an expensive plugin or whatever, is you could, for example, use a very simple volume plugin that I think most DAWs have as a stock plugin. Here it is called a chopper, and what I did is I just soloed my bass track and it sounds like this. And then I inserted the chopper as an insert effect and just basically left it at the default settings. I synchronized the speed and set it to 4/4, and then what happens is so, like I said, this is a kind of a simple volume effect, an auto effect, and it basically goes like this all the time. And what you can do is you can tell the effect how fast you want it to be. That is an interesting solution. How deep you want the effect to work and which waveform. That could also produce some really interesting effects. It is probably not exactly the same outcome like if you would use a compressor, but that would be a really quick and simple and cheap and also not very complicated solution. Another effect you could use to achieve something pretty similar is the volcano, which is a kind of an equalizer sound designing tool, and it has 4 bands. It is an equalizer and you can also modulate it. What it does is you can insert in your modulation section, you could just insert an LFO and tell the LFO what kind of curve you like and what kind of synchronization pattern you like, and then you don't need a trigger track anymore. So that means I only need 2 things, that is my bass track with the sound and the plugin that works like, let's say, a frequency dependent equalizer / compressor. Here I used the 4 bands to shape my bass, and you can also see that the LFO triggers the volume in the pattern that is shown over here. And if I play my track, so you could hear it is basically really close to the chopper or also the sidechaining function of the compressor. But you have, of course, way more possibilities for setting your trigger and offsetting it, like if you wanted to start somewhere else and to produce different curves and different rhythms, and how strong you want it to be, in which frequency you want it to use. So that is a real interesting but also a little bit more complicated way of doing so. Another possibility that you have in Cubase is also really interesting. That works like opposite of what I said before. And that is, you have an audio track like this. But as you can see and hear, there is nothing audible right now. Even though I have set it to solo and it is routed correctly and I have my fader at 0 dB. And the reason for that is I have inserted a gate. And that is a special gate, is called Midi gate. And that is a function that a lot of people don't know here in Cubase. It is a gate that works on an audio track, but it is triggered with Midi. And this works like that. So the Midi gate is here inserted on my audio track, and I changed the settings to the way that I think they would work on this track, and then I inserted a Midi track and put some Midi note information on it and routed this track to the Midi gate plugin. And now what changes is, if I have my bass track on solo, it sounds like this. So you can't hear anything. And if I activate my gate trigger Midi track, you can hear the sound of my bass track. And what happens is the Midi gate is closed if it doesn't receive any Midi data, so you can't hear anything. And if I activate my trigger track, the gate will open in the rhythm of my trigger notes and therefore will give me some kind of a sidechaining function. So one more thing in the end, what a lot of people want to do if they're using a ghost track to trigger their effect, they would produce a negative delay. And that is just really short, like let's say 15, 20 or maybe something around that milliseconds. And that you can do here if you go to your audio track that triggers the effect, or even the Midi track has the same function. So if you click on the track and you look in your inspector up here, then you can see a track delay slider. And if you put in like a negative delay of minus 20 milliseconds, that means your track does not start here, but it will start like minus 20 milliseconds before the actual beat. And that triggers the gate to a different moment in time and therefore will fall better on the 4 on the floor kick drum, because the 4 on the floor kick drum is already perfect in time, and if you send that effect somewhere else and it triggers, and that means the effect will always be a little bit too late. It's not much, but probably a tiny bit. And if you put in a negative delay to that track, that means the gate or the compressor or delay or reverb, whatever it is you want to trigger, will be triggered to the exact right moment in time. So I hope you found these ideas helpful and you can use it for working on your own projects in your DAW. I will also leave a few links in the description down below where you can find some more ideas to working with Midi and the sidechaining function explained in Cubase with the sidechaining window.